Today, is the government any closer to stopping the boats? Keir Starmer faces a backlash over welfare. And is artificial intelligence bad for the film industry? This is Politics Live. With me in the studio, Conservative MP Matt Warman, Shadow Minister for Work and Pensions Alison McGovern, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats Daisy Cooper, and The Spectator's economics editor Kate Andrews. Today, this barge to house asylum seekers arrives in Dorset amid local opposition.
I think it's a totally inhumane way to house people who've already had a very traumatic start in their journey.
Meanwhile, the government's illegal migration bill will become law after objections in the Lords are overturned. So will this mean the government can deliver its promise to stop the boats? Also today,
if you have more than 2 children at the moment, you don't get benefits. Would that change under a Labour government?
We're not changing that policy.
You're not changing the 2-child policy.
After saying this on Sunday, Keir Starmer faces a backlash from within his own party. And we'll be asking this mayor why he's quitting Labour and plans to run as an independent candidate. And actors on strike in Hollywood over concerns about artificial intelligence. But will AI be bad for the film industry? Let's start with the issue of free school meals for primary school children in Britain. Jamie Oliver, the chef, was being asked about this at the Future of Britain conference that's been put together by the former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair, and he had this to say.
As a country, as a team, we have to protect those children. So we have to get that over the line. Mayor Sadiq is actually doing it. As of this May. The local people like in York, they're doing it, but in Wales you get it, and Scotland you get it. Not in England's the meanest. England's the meanest. Those vulnerable kids.
Jamie Oliver speaking this morning. Is England the meanest when it comes to providing free school meals for primary school children in Britain?
No, I don't think it is, and I say that because I think it's about getting the balance right. I've got a daughter going into Year 3, for instance. I'll be asked to pay for her school meals. I think it's right that people who are lucky enough to be able to afford it make that contribution, and we're therefore able to focus on children who need it most. That seems to me to be a sensible balance.
Alison, is England the meanest? Jamie Oliver referenced Mayor Sadiq Khan, the Labour mayor, who is going to make this one-off funding for London primary schools for 23-24 at a cost of £130 million.
Well, London is in England.
Yes, actually, thank you for that.
Where I agreed with Jamie was where he said that we as a team have to all care about all of our kids. And, you know, it is an incredibly difficult economic environment to be doing that. But I think where, you know, we've got different areas experimenting with free school meals and, you know, we'll see what happens. In a bigger sense, I worry about children's parents and the jobs they're doing.
But on this question, Alison, is England the meanest when it comes to providing free school meals for primary school children in Britain, as Jamie Oliver said?
Well, as I said, I don't think he necessarily meant it as more than a bit of rhetoric there, because, like, London is in England. But I think the bigger question is, how do we make sure that people have money in their pockets so that families can give their children a good childhood? We know that if you ask most people, do they feel better after the past 13 years? The answer is broadly no, and that's got to change.
Is England the meanest when it comes to providing free school meals in Britain? Scotland is more generous. Wales is rolling out free school meals for all primary school children, I think, from later on this year.
I think it's quite difficult to compare different countries because you're sort of comparing sort of apples and pears. What I would say is that when it comes to free school meals, this is an issue that's incredibly close to my heart and incredibly close to the heart of Liberal Democrats.
So would you fund free school meals for all primary school children?
It's a long-standing Liberal Democrat policy to extend free school meals to all children in primary schools and those children in secondary schools whose families are on universal credit. We have millions of children living in poverty in this country. We have millions of them who are not able, almost a million of them, whose families are on universal credit, who cannot even get one hot meal a day. It's really, really important that the government moves on this.
Is England the meanest when it comes to free school meals?
I don't know who's the meanest, but I know who is hypocritical, and that is Jamie Oliver, who says in one breath that we need to talk about vulnerable children and what happens to free school meals, and then in the other continues to support policies like the sugar tax, which are deeply regressive and take more money from those parents of vulnerable children.
Right. And if I can just challenge the framing of your question, Jamie.
Well, I'm just saying what Jamie Oliver said.
You said that Wales is more generous. You said Scotland is more generous. It's not more generous to pursue this one policy and focus in a way that actually takes away the ability to say, let's put the money into specifically people who need it most, rather than to say this is a universal benefit. The idea that universal benefits are somehow more generous is the kind of economic illiteracy that gets pushed too widely by some parts of the left.
Do you agree with Kate that Jamie Oliver's being hypocritical here?
No, I don't. I think he's
not over the sugar tax, which is regressive.
No, I mean, I think that's a different point about how we tackle public health, and I think that Jamie Oliver's, as I said, is trying to stand up for the idea that we all have responsibility to make sure that children have a good childhood. I mean, Kate can disagree with... But
Labour's not pledging, is it, to say that all primary school children should have free school meals?
We're pledging that we will tax non-doms properly and put that money into giving every child a good breakfast, because not only will that help about 60 quid a week for parents, but also that widens the range of jobs that parents can do. To come back to my point before, which is, how do we get more money in people's pockets? Well,
you'd reverse the sugar tax.
No, improve people's ability to get better jobs, and having breakfast clubs at primary schools will really help with that.
Let's talk about this issue. Financial Times headline, UK illegal migration bill, as we said in the headlines, passes after government defeats Lord's challenges. This means that ping pong, as we call it in parliamentary speak, it's over. That's the bill going backwards and forwards between the two chambers, between the Lords and the Commons. And that's because the government won a series of votes in the Lords very late last night, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, and so the bill will now become law. I say somewhat surprisingly because the Lords had passed numerous amendments in the last round. It's passed. It's going to get onto the statute book probably this week. What practical difference will it make?
So I think it's a key part of a package that is all about making practical differences. So some of this is about straightforward deterrent. It's about saying to people that if you arrive by illegal means, then that is not a way of guaranteeing a life in Britain. But it's also a key part of saying we are going to, and we already are, processing applications much more rapidly. We're going to provide people with accommodation that is decent but is not the kind of relative luxury that we're seeing in some hotels. So this is a necessary part of a package that will, I think, make a huge difference and addresses a really key concern up and down the country.
Yeah, but on the practical difference, what material difference will we see on Friday, let's say? Because the bill says there'll be a duty on the Home Secretary to remove anyone who enters the UK in breach of immigration control. Where will those people be removed to?
So that's about fundamentally saying this is either returning people to their own country. We've got people coming from places like Egypt, places like Turkey, which market themselves as holiday destinations, Albania long in the news. It's about returning people to safe countries or to get the Rwanda scheme off the ground as quickly as possible. Now, I'm not saying that planes will be taking off on Friday, but I think that is a very important part of a package that is a key way of deterring people from making an illegal and dangerous journey.
It's like Groundhog Day in the House of Commons. You know, year by year by year, we have more bits of legislation when we get warm words like that we've just heard, promises that they're going to deal with the backlog. That never happens. And all the while, I would, you know, really challenge the idea that somehow it's an easy life. We're talking about some people who have dealt with horrific war and conflict. And I really think that the best thing that we can do is deal with those cases quickly, because that means those people who need to be removed can be removed.
Where will they be removed to?
And those people who actually have a case can then rebuild their
but where will
lives.
they be removed to, the ones you want to have removed if they fail with their asylum application?
So the best way that we can do that is by building up alliances with other countries. And in the end, you know, after all of the damage that was done to our relationship with France, in the end, the government have come back around to trying to improve that, I think, too late. So we can use the money that's being spent on the Rwanda scheme in a much better way to have a proper border force and to have proper policing of it, and then also, you know, make the system work properly. I think actually all we've seen this week is yet more promises and no delivery, which actually is harmful to some of the most vulnerable people in the world and doesn't serve any British citizens.
The fact is the government is doing that improvement of border force, it's doing that increasing processing of applications. The only sense in which Alison is right is it is like Groundhog Day because it's 80-something times that Labour have voted against these measures. You simply can't say we would do what the Tories would do, but we'd do it better.
We've got a better plan.
Right, but your plan, as you such, according to your 5-point plan, which you've mentioned, you want a better deal with, for example, France. But why would President Macron give Keir Starmer a better deal than Rishi Sunak?
Well, I mean, in part because Keir Starmer hasn't been part of a government that's spent years and years and years undermining our relationship with our nearest neighbours.
So, as you said, they've built back that relationship. Why? It seems to get on quite well with Rishi Sunak.
They've tried to. I think they've recognised, all of the errors that have happened. But, in the end, this is about being realistic about what can help, and that means cancelling the unworkable Rwanda scheme and getting that money into the front line where it can actually really help people. And at the heart of this is the backlog. The last Labour government got that down and we can do it again.
Right. Cutting the backlog. Is that the most important thing as far as you're concerned?
I think there's 2 or 3 things that need to happen now. I do think this is an appalling piece of legislation. I think it's going to be unworkable and expensive. But in terms of what needs to happen now, Liberal Democrats have said time and time again, first of all, we need safe and legal routes for those people who have a genuine asylum claim to come here. We need to have a proper enforcement body to crack down on those unscrupulous employers who employ people who are either trafficked here against their will or who are smuggled here to work. The government has failed to do that, and they have got to get back on track on the backlog. The Liberal Democrats have said you could scrap the Rwanda scheme, use that money to reduce the backlog and invest in people who can process those claims. And I think the government has seriously got a question to answer, because since 2018, their rate of processing these claims has gone down and down and down, and the government has never explained why that is. And I think the Conservative government owe the British public an answer as to why we're in this mess in failing to deal with that backlog.
I think if you look at the latest figures, you'll see that they're well up from where they were. They're going to continue.
They were on the floor, weren't they?
They're going to continue to rise. No one denies that those figures should be in the thousands rather than in the tens in terms of weekly. But why have they got so much worse since 2018? Why has the Home Office failed to get on top of the backlog since 2018? The Home Office's figures show they've got worse and worse and worse, and we've never had an answer from the government on that. So I think the investments that you've seen to deal with very different applications will correct what was a fall that no one wanted to introduce. I think the government clearly
But why did it
acknowledges...
happen? Why did it happen in 2018? Why did the Conservative government take their foot off the pedal and allow this enormous backlog to build?
So I think the situation was different in 2018, and that should we have been building up in anticipation of predictable changes? Well, yes, with hindsight, of course we should have done, but no one was saying in 2018 this is what's coming down the track in 2020. So hindsight is a wonderful thing. I get the point that you're making, but the investments that we're seeing now are already bearing fruit in an increased rate.
So I think you've admitted that actually the Conservative government got this wrong, and then they closed down the safe and legal routes that made it even worse.
We'll come back to the bearing fruit. Coming back to the point of bearing fruit, we will revisit that, because in terms of the number of people making those journeys, it's going up rather than the other way.
Well, the application processing is going up.
Well, the application processing may be, as I say, from a low bar. Kate, in terms of the practical difference that this bill is going to make when, as Matt admits, the Rwanda scheme is still very much in the courts. We're not going to get a decision until the autumn, probably. Even though they haven't actually rejected the idea of the scheme, they still don't think Rwanda is a safe country. What does that mean in terms of this bill being passed?
Well, look, I don't think it means much right now, because until there is a third country to deport people to, not much changes. And to all of Daisy's points about processing, I mean, there is no serious asylum system in this country right now. So I don't think much materially changes very quickly. I do think this could prove to be, politically speaking, a big win for the government in future years, depending on what happens in the courts. Ethically speaking is a completely different question. I would echo that we are in desperate need of safe and legal routes for refugees to come to the UK. I find it baffling that a Conservative government that claims to understand individualism, freedom, pursuing a better life for yourself, has essentially said that real refugee seekers, people who've experienced human rights atrocities that we cannot imagine, will come here, be deemed illegal, and deported to another country.
That's not what the bill says at all.
Unless you are from very specific countries, including Ukraine, you do not have a legal way to come to this country right now. There is not a pathway for you. You are de facto illegal. and we are going to get horror stories of what people have experienced being put on these planes.
Let's be clear. What the bill does and what Parliament encouraged the government to go even further on was on safe and legal routes, was on establishing an expansion of that. I 100% support that. I think it's the right thing to do.
Why don't we have those details before we have this game?
And because I think it's important to pass the bill as rapidly as possible, we can do two things at once.
Do we not think it's important to have safe and legal routes as rapidly as possible?
We have a number of safe and legal routes. We will have more. We will be we will be laying out more of those. But on your point about providing a hospitable place for people who are the most vulnerable in the world, the most vulnerable in the world are people largely who are in the camps surrounding the areas that are most at conflict. They are not people who can afford huge amounts of money to people smugglers. What we have to do is focus on people who need our help most, working with the UN. That's what we'll be doing.
I think you've mistaken affordability. I think you've mistaken affordability. Those people cannot afford it. They are scraping together their entire life savings in order to pursue a better future. Let's not frame this as some kind of jolly.
I think, and I'm not doing that at all, and you know I'm not doing that. What I am doing is saying the most vulnerable people in the world are those that are in the camps closest to the problems that they face, and that the worst thing we can be doing is fueling the model of people smugglers who take people who are, vulnerable, and then put them in boats at enormous risk. I think this is a humane bill that does the right thing.
Nobody wants to fuel that model. But if you're right, and actually we should be helping people who are in the most vulnerable position, what explains the situation whereby we knew people coming from Afghanistan, we knew who they were, we knew they needed our help, and all of the emails that were forwarded just got left in an email inbox? What explains that level of incompetence and that treatment of people who, on your terms, are the most vulnerable people in the world? What explains the manner in which we treated Syrian refugees in camps where I had it reported to me by organisations that people didn't trust the British government anymore to help them? What explains that?
I think
let Matt respond to that question.
If you look at the actual numbers of people taken from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from some of those incredibly vulnerable countries, that is where Britain has made a huge contribution. No one's suggesting we can take everybody, but we have made a huge contribution fuelled by the generosity of the British people, and it's right to ask those people to focus on the people who need help most.
My fury is with the incompetence of the Home Office that continually makes what you say you want to happen harder.
Well, Alison, I just want you to answer the questions around the barge that we showed in the headlines, but there are more pictures because it has arrived us and it's going to house asylum seekers. You can see it here. It's arrived in Portland in Dorset. The government says the barge will help them to reduce the cost of housing asylum seekers, many of whom are in hotels, as you mentioned, Matt. They want to house asylum seekers in former military bases too. Now, there's a lot of opposition to the barge locally. You heard again from one of the protesters, and there were more wide demonstrations in the area this morning. I think it's going to house about 500 people. But this headline in The Times says Labour may keep migrant barges while cutting the backlog that you were talking about. It's reporting the view of the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Alison, an incoming Labour government would still use barges and former military sites to house asylum seekers. Is that right?
Well, our plan is our plan.
Yeah, but on this, would you support the idea of keeping those barges while you work through the backlog to house asylum seekers?
Look, I don't know what the detail of that story is, but what I think we've heard from this discussion is that there's a serious administrative failure going on in the Home Office, and that's got to be the priority for tackling it. But when it comes to this situation,
because it will go on for some time, won't it? While you're processing asylum seekers, where will they be kept? Will it be in hotels, or will it be in barges, or former military bases?
The first thing that a Labour government would do would be to work much more closely with local authorities to say, how can we make this happen in a sustainable way as possible? Let me give you an example. On a number of occasions in the Wirral, we found out details about what was going on with hotels and various other things through newspapers and no real working together at all. That makes vulnerable people even more vulnerable.
But
so
what local people will want to know, Daisy, is will the barges be kept? Would you advocate for them to be scrapped completely? And if so, where would asylum seekers be housed?
Well, as I understand it, part of the reason why barges were dismissed in the first place was because they were proven to be expected to be even more expensive than the hotels. So we don't know how much they're actually going to cost. And the other thing is that I do think this is a little bit of a stunt, because if you were going to house everybody on boats and barges, you need around 300 of them. So I think the government has got into a real mess here, and the situation keeps going from bad to worse. As Liberal Democrats keep saying, if the government could just scrap the Rwanda scheme, they could save the millions of pounds that they're spending on it and use that money to invest in the Home Office to get the backlog down. And then we wouldn't need to deal with these ifs and buts. This is a mess of the government's own making. We keep giving them solutions and they keep ignoring them.
Do you agree on the barges?
So I think no. I think the barges are an important part of a deterrent process. No one's suggesting that they're going to be housing every single migrant that is here and in that interim period, however short it is, while their application is being processed. But I do think it is the right thing for local communities and the right thing for people who are vulnerable themselves to put them in areas where you can concentrate the resources that are needed, and you can make sure that you can get information out of them to process their claims more quickly as well.
Let's move on and look at this story. The headline in the Daily Telegraph. Keir Starmer, Labour leader, faces Labour mutiny over plans to keep child benefit cap. You heard him in the headlines. We also talked a little bit about it yesterday. The two-child cap prevents parents from claiming universal credit or child tax credit for a third or additional child born after April 2017. It was initially announced, the policy, by George Osborne in 2015. Should Labour scrap the two-child benefit cap?
We have got a policy that we're going to fund everything properly, and we're going to have a fully costed manifesto, and that's why Keir was right to say that's not our policy, because everything must be costed properly. And people will have heard us say that. Look, I see the effects of what 13 years have done to families in my constituency every day. That's why, as I mentioned before, we've tried to identify areas where we can find funding and give that to families to help with the cost of living.
Do you support the child benefit cap, the two-child benefit cap?
It's a policy we voted against, and I think that, as I say, you see the effects of this.
Wow.
Why
are we making a stand about it then, Alison? Because it's obviously causing huge unease within the Labour Party. I mean, Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, says she still stands by what she said a few years ago, that the cap was obscene and inhumane. She hasn't changed her view. Only last month, the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, described the policy as heinous and vicious. You really are going to keep a heinous and vicious policy, as described by your colleagues, without any real explanation? I mean, Keir Starmer didn't give it.
No one's changed their view. The point is, as I just said, what we want to do is to have costed policies that are affordable and credible.
And priorities?
That's why we've identified where we can bring money in and to help families with the daily costs of living. So, for example, breakfast clubs will help people, as we were talking about before. The issue is we need to make sure that we've got that stability and credibility. But when it comes to child poverty, as I mentioned before, only 1 in 6 people working on low pay ever escape it. That's got to change. That's why I want to see job centres and our employment support properly help families.
But on this policy, has Keir Starmer misjudged his own party on this policy? Even Lucy Powell today, part of the Shadow Cabinet, saying there is deep unease within the party in an interview within the last hour.
None of us feel at ease with what is happening to children in this country.
There's unease about not pledging to scrap it.
Look, I know that you want to talk about the Labour Party, but none of us feel at ease with what is going on in our country at the moment. You can see the consequences of the past 13 years all around you. Wow. And we know that it's our job to try to tackle that. And that's the point of having a Labour government, is to try to tackle that. But we have to do it in a way that is credible and where all of our policies are properly funded.
Well, you've made that clear. I mean, actually, Daisy, perhaps Keir Starmer is sticking to this policy because he's realised it's actually very popular with the public. Recent polling by YouGov revealed 60% of the public think it should be kept, that you shouldn't be able to claim universal credit or more benefits beyond having 2 children.
Well, I don't agree with that. Personally, I think it's a horrible policy. Liberal Democrats fought it vociferously in coalition, and as soon as we were out of government, the Conservatives went ahead with it.
60% of the public disagree with you that it's a horrible policy. They think it's a good policy.
Some people may do, but I think also a lot of people, if they saw the real effects of it, they might change their minds, and I hope that they might. The fact is that we have 800,000 children in this country living in poverty, around half of those, as I understand it, as a result of this policy. I think it is a really, really horrible policy. It was in our manifesto at the last general election to scrap it. I hope very much that it might be in the next one. I don't, not in a position to make pledges on that, but I certainly hope that all parties can work towards that.
What do you make of the sort of dilemma? Popular with the public in polling that suggests it, and Keir Starmer's decision to stick with the policy?
I think it's a slight distraction. If you were really serious about helping parents at the low end of the income spectrum, we'd be talking about housing, we'd be talking about childcare, some of the highest costs in the OECD. We would be talking about policies that would be putting many more thousands of pounds back into these parents' pockets rather than tinkering with a specific policy. I think we also have to have, in general, a wider discussion about making it easier to be a parent in the UK. It's a very difficult place to raise a child. And I think you would go far past this one particular policy. What it has revealed is the extent to which the Labour Party is taking its fiscal credibility very seriously. And I think it's very telling that a costed plan matters more than the plan itself these days. It is a hangover from the Liz Truss era, right? It wasn't just a lesson for the Tory party, it was a lesson for the Labour Party too. The era of cheap money is over. You cannot pledge money you don't have. So if you want to make these kinds of calls for a more generous system, you have to say where the money's coming from.
And would it cost a huge amount of money to scrap it?
Well, I think when we're talking about welfare reform, I mean, we're already talking about, so many tens of billions that have been added to the system over the past few years because of COVID and more people on out-of-work benefits. Welfare is proving hugely expensive. If you want to expand it in any which way, you have to say where the money's coming from.
There is another issue that is proving difficult for Keir Starmer. Let's just show you this headline. Jamie Driscoll, North of Tyne Mayor, quits the Labour Party. Last month, Jamie Driscoll was blocked from standing for the new role of North East Mayor. Yesterday, he resigned from the Labour Party, announced he was raising funds to stand as an independent, and he joins us now. Jamie, can you confirm that you are going to stand as an independent candidate against the Labour candidate?
Hi, Joe. Yes, I am. We put the crowdfunder out yesterday. I said if I raised £25,000 by the end of August, I would do it. I think we're on about £75,000 in 24 hours. So, yes, I will keep my word and I will be running as an independent.
Are you concerned that actually what you're going to do is risk the Labour Party losing this to the Conservatives?
No, I'm really not, actually. The support I've had has been overwhelming from all sides of politics. I've had Conservative councillors, Liberal Democrats, Greens, Independents, and loads of Labour people saying, Jamie, we want you to run, and if you run, we'll vote for you. Because I'm an experienced candidate, I've done the job. It was me who led the negotiations to get this, the best funded devolution deal in England. And I think with my track record, then the support is there. I think I'll win it.
Alison, what do you say to Jamie? He's going to win it. He's going to beat the Labour candidate.
I don't think so. I think Kim McGuinness is a fantastic candidate, and, I think that we have every reason to campaign for her, and we're going to put forward a really positive vision. I think the North East has a huge amount to offer the whole country in terms of growth, and I think Kim will be telling that positive story, and I think that people will give her a lot of support.
Right. I mean, Jamie has quit the party after being blocked. Why was he blocked? Was that the right decision for a party that wants to be in government?
Well, look, it's for the NEC to take those decisions, and it's not... it's just not one for me to, interfere with the internal workings of the process.
Jamie?
But I think that, as I said, I think my priority is always, especially in these mayoral roles where I think, we can do a huge amount of good in terms of economic development for our cities and really give people better jobs and opportunities in life. I think Kim McGuinness will do all of that, and she'll put a fantastic positive vision forward, and I will be supporting her.
Jamie?
Yeah, well, we're talking about economic competence and fiscal credibility. Let's just examine my track record, shall we? So, through COVID, through a pandemic, I've gone and created 3 times as many jobs as I needed to by now. I've done 15 years progress against the government's target in 4 years. I've increased the amount of skills training so people can get these better jobs and earn more money. And I've increased that from 22,000 to 33,000 a year on the same budget. Every pound I invest returns £3 to Treasury.
But you could have done that within the Labour Party. You could have done that within the Labour Party.
No, but this is answering Alison's point about I've done this. So why get rid of someone who is demonstrating fiscal credibility? And we were talking about child poverty. I've used the overhead from that to implement a groundbreaking child poverty prevention scheme running through schools, because child poverty costs us a fortune in the long term. We know that. So really, what could anyone have asked of a candidate better? This line that somehow you're not good enough to do the job, it makes no sense.
If Jamie's got issues with what happened with with his process with the NEC, then I wonder why he should be taking it up with them and dealing with it that way. There are plenty of things that happen. There are plenty of things that happen, within political parties, and that can be dealt with. But as I say, Kim McGuinness is a fantastic candidate that I will be proud of.
The rules to prevent appeals. There is no right to appeal. That is not fair by any stretch of the imagination. So, the Labour Party has given me no choice but to do this.
Right.
And I've had widespread praise from people because I work cross-party. I don't play daft political games. I just put the people of the North East first.
Right.
And that's why I'm going to run.
Right. Are you considering yourself to be a sort of modern-day Ken Livingstone, who, of course, famously and infamously took on Labour's candidate? In fact, I covered that mayoral election in London where he beat Frank Dobson, who was Labour's candidate. Is that how you see yourself?
I wouldn't necessarily see myself as Ken Livingstone, but I think there's certain process parallels that where the party blocks a candidate who's widely respected and popular,
but the party does
that it
have
causes
a right,
people a degree of outrage. But I'm quite happy to stand on my track record and answer any questions you like about my track record. It's really solid.
Jamie Driscoll, thank you very much for joining us. And just before we move on, don't forget that we are now a podcast. We, being Politics Live, is now a podcast, and you can catch up at any time on BBC Sounds, as you can see there, if you're on the move or not. But it's, of course, better always to watch the programme live, or certainly just as good. Let's talk about actors and AI, because Hollywood actors are striking for the first time in 43 years. You can see here the Screen Actors Guild, the actors' union known as SAG, are leading the strike over disputes about pay and working conditions, but also because of fears around artificial intelligence. We can talk to Paul Fleming, who's the General Secretary of Equity, the trade union for the performing arts and entertainment industries in the UK. Hello to you, Paul. What are the fears in Hollywood about AI?
So the fears in Hollywood are very similar to the fears that we have. It's about removing and displacing work that's already happening. It's also about growing profits and the use of mechanization, essentially to just drive profit and not put that money back into the hands of the workforce. And yeah, it is also about the regulation of this from a moral standpoint as well. AI is essentially just generating from existing content. What happens to the people being paid and remunerated from that? And what does that mean for the future of content? As Simon Pegg was saying only the other day, a machine doesn't have breakups and child trauma and an experience of the world. We don't get moral and artistic progression if we hang on to AI in an unregulated way. Right,
you mentioned Simon Pegg, interestingly, because you're referring to the interview in the article in The Telegraph. The headline they have picked out is Simon Pegg says AI will weed out mediocrity in Hollywood. He says it might be a good thing because it encourages humans to up their game and stops us, as I say, from being mediocre. What did you think of that?
I thought it was a very selective examination of his comments. He does talk very explicitly about how writers cannot be replaced by machines. But he is right, perhaps, about some of the mediocrity. Of course, this strike is being driven by bosses who have a very narrow and myopic view of how the industry works. And if there is any mediocrity in Hollywood or the entertainment industry, it's because of unadventurous decisions that are made about content, programming, and the sorts of projects that people are brave enough to fund. So if we're going to replace the money men with machines, then I think Simon's probably onto something, and I think he'd find a lot of support from all the unions.
Kate?
Well, I think there's a lot going on in this strike, and it's probably worth breaking it down. So as we move into this transition into the streaming revolution, it would make sense to probably see an overhaul in the pay structures and how people are compensated for their work under this very new system. I think as well, if we're talking about AI footprints or digital reconstructions, I saw that there was some story in which background actors were having their likeness taken by AI, and the idea is that companies can just use that over and over again without embarrassing these people. Well, that seems ridiculous. If you get royalties for some things, surely you get royalties for your appearance that AI has taken. But in terms of the overall narrative on AI, it's going to be hugely beneficial to Hollywood and to all the people who go and watch their content. And, you know, I think there's also been some criticism around the fact that AI can now essentially pull together a trailer. Well, those are the kinds of things that we might want to use AI for. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean total job loss, but it will mean displacement for some time. And that's what Hollywood and essentially every industry is going to have to grapple with.
Well, Paul, it will be hugely beneficial to Hollywood, AI, embracing it.
Embracing it in a regulated way that turns the profits that it creates into the pockets of the artists and the workforce that create the product. Yes, no one here is claiming that technology should stop. And there's lots of extra work that AI brings, particularly in video games and other new media, but it has to be regulated in a way that benefits the workforce. Our experience between the 1920s and the 1970s was that new technology made work safer, it made people's work-life balance better, and it put money in their pockets. Our experience over the last 50 years has not been so smooth, and that's why the unions are fighting back to say very fairly, we don't want to stop it, we want to regulate.
Right, but AI broadly, in your mind, is and could be a good thing for Hollywood and for the film industry.
I don't think AI is a moral good or a moral bad. It's something that needs to be used responsibly and for the benefit of the workforce and audiences, and not billionaire bosses and producers.
Daisy?
So, I mean, AI is a tool, right? It's just like a hammer. You can use it for good, you can use it for bad. And there are huge innovations that are coming with AI, particularly in the space of health. For example, radiographers are using AI already, and I know that the particular Royal College is building a list and a register of all the places around the country that are using AI. But there has to be regulation, and I do think the government's got the wrong approach on this. Many countries are taking a comprehensive approach to the regulation of AI. Here, this government is doing it in a very kind of piecemeal kind of way. And as a result, I think we're going to end up with lots of gaps in our regulatory system. We need to catch up. We need to be on the front foot with this. And I really worry that we're not going to be.
I think that's the opposite of the case. I think if you look at the approach the EU was doing, which was what Daisy's just advocated for, they've recently turned that on its head and adopted an approach that's somewhat more in common with Britain. But look, the broad principle of AI is obviously that there are going to be situations where it supercharges existing illegal things, and we need to be on guard against that. And there are going to be new loopholes and fundamentally new challenges. I think in the acting case, it's an interesting example where you've got historically lots of people who have taken a one-off fee rather than a percentage for being in a film and have given away the rights to royalties. Is it for the government to say, no, you don't have the right to sell your image for people to use time and time again? I think that should be an individual contractual thing. So I think there's a danger here that we conflate a workforce dispute with a government policy problem.
Well, there's a different way of looking at it again, which is, you know, Paul's right, which is there's what the government can do in terms of regulation, but then there's also what trade unions can do through collective voice and negotiate collectively. And I think where any form of technology might disrupt an industry, that's where you can get agreements amongst workforces about how those benefits will be shared and what that means for things like skills and how people are able to get the better paid jobs because they're able to develop their skills during a period of transition. I think copyright is obviously clearly very important underpinning this as well. You know, people have the right to get the benefits of their creativity, and I would want to see that protected. But let's look at what's happened with the train strikes in the UK. You know, where relatively big pay offers have been put on the table, and the pushback often comes not just over the pay, but on the fact that the unions want to make sure that certain kinds of automation aren't going to take place, not today, 10 years into the future. So I don't think it's so simple as to say, well, AI has to fit the workforce exactly as we see it now, because then we're never going to have any real kind of revolution.
solution. But we have to be much more thoughtful.
Not what I said.
We have to be much more thoughtful. Well, but your emphasis is on the workers as they exist now, and that is very important. We have to be more thoughtful about how, when these transitions take place, the support that's underneath them.
My point was, it's not just a matter of individual negotiation about what happens. There's also that collective voice, which I was pointing out that Paul was right about, that can have a positive effect. In the end, technology always offers us the opportunity to get more and better jobs if used well.
And say, I mean, I think there is a space here for the government to step in, because there are some laws exist already outside of AI. So take, copyright and infringement, for example. If you are a writer, and I'm in MP for St Albans, across the south and the west of Hertfordshire, we have a very vibrant creative industry with Elstree Film Studios. If if you're a writer and your work is being used without your permission to generate other work, that should, in theory, be infringement. That should be against copyright law as it stands right now, but because there isn't any regulation around AI, that's not enforceable as it currently is. So there are laws that already exist that could be put in place quite quickly for some of the infringements that we're seeing already, and we just need the government to step up and make that happen quite quickly.
Well, I mean, that is in terms of government regulation. Let's go back to Paul, because you may have seen William Hague, the former Conservative leader, writing about this strike in LA, where he says AI is starting to write better film scripts. Shock to writers who are on strike in an attempt to limit the role of AI in supplementing or replacing their work. I mean, it's hardly a surprise, is it?
I'm not quite sure that William Hague has got it right there. Of course, if you had AI in the era of Christians being fed to lions, it would never have stopped. AI can only rely on the entertainment that people have previously created, and that entertainment disproportionately comes from a class of people and people with particular characteristics. And so actually AI is very, very, very regressive. It's not as creative, and it's not going to supplant creative jobs in those ways. The big question is, how is the money fairly shared? And Michael's not wrong that it's really important to not confuse public policy and a dispute. But what's really the big question we should be asking in this country is whether workers here in the entertainment industry and elsewhere have the tools to be empowered to take on such contractual disputes. The draconian strike situation in this country, the draconian industrial relations framework that we're operating with, means that this union is strike ready, and when we go into negotiations next year, that is a threat that's on the table. But the hurdles we have to go through in order to stand up for jobs and stand up for regulation are significantly more draconian than in the United States, which comes as a shock to a lot of people.
All right. Well, Paul Fleming, thank you very much. Just before we move on, finally, what do you think about, is the first sort of major strike over artificial intelligence? Are we going to see more strikes on this basis?
No, I think we absolutely are going to see technology, as it always has, drive tensions in labour relations. That's not a surprise. What's going to be challenging about this is that this is moving at such a rate, and it's very hard to predict, as Kate said, quite what the dispute will be next year, never mind in 10 years' time. So I think it's really important that the government's principles-based approach to regulation is something that is also looked at when it comes to these kinds of disputes, because you have to look at the principles. You can't imagine that you can play whack-a-mole with every single individual instance.
Let's just take a look at this headline before we go. Daily Mail: ministers relax visa rules for foreign bricklayers, roofers, carpenters and plasterers after Home Office deems there to be a shortage of construction workers. Are you disappointed or pleased, Matt?
I think this is pragmatic migration policy when you have control of your own policies, which is one of the many things that was central to the Brexit referendum. Longer term, of course, it's right that the government focuses on making sure that we give people the skills to adopt those professions themselves, and we're seeing that in the growth of medical school places back in sort of 5-6 years ago. We'll see it again in some of these.
Well, it's interesting because this is what the Home Secretary said. She seemed to have a different view when she spoke about this at the National Conservative Conference just a couple of months ago.
We mustn't forget how to do things for ourselves. There is no good reason why we can't train up enough truck drivers, butchers, fruit pickers, builders or welders. Brexit enables us to build a high-skilled, high-wage economy that is less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour.
Well, she couldn't be clearer. Why she agreed to this, relaxing of visa rules?
I mean, she's just said a version of what I just said, which is that we have to train our own people. Right. Of course we do.
So it's a failure. It's a mission of failure that you haven't done that.
Well, but in the meantime, where gaps arise in the short term or in the medium term, to use the flexibility we have in controlling our own migration policy to plug those gaps is exactly what we should be doing. And that's the Brexit freedom that the Home Secretary was talking about.
Got
10 seconds.
There is a good reason why it's not happened, and it's called 13 years of Conservative government.
Could you take any of those groups off the shortage occupation list?
We would have a new Skills England agency to drive forward our skills with.
All right, that's all we have time for today, but I'll be back for tomorrow's Prime Minister's Questions here at 11:50. Bye-bye.